Aeonic Wars. The catastrophes of Honkai Star Rail that result in obliteration so widespread that large fractions of the known universe are eliminated in the sheer fallout of the clashing of multiple paths. This is what Iron Tomb is trying to cause. We've already seen what Castellano was capable of with his sheer rage igniting into a blazing inferno that incinerated multiple galaxies, and he is only Emanator level. This is nothing compared to what the likes of Zephyro are capable of, let alone Nanook themselves. So what would happen if an Aeon War started once again? Well, with the live stream for patch 3.5 right around the corner, there is but one thing left to talk about, and that is the potential future of the war among the Aeons mentioned in the manuscript of Era Nova. Because the scale of what happens in Aeon Wars are absolutely out of control and unimaginable, to say the very least. And just in case this fantasy of Iron Tomb comes to fruition, we will have to look back on some things to know what exactly to expect, to an extent. Because this is the Aeon War of Star Rail explained. Okay. So first off, I am well aware that it is very unlikely for this to happen, and this is all very suspicious from the get-go. Because when we get our first glimpse of Iron Tomb's plan to kill Nous, Jingliu mentions tempering the hunt's arrows with golden blood, and to be honest, she shouldn't know what golden blood is unless she's talking about Nanook, but I don't know how they would get Nanook's blood straight from Nanook, because if they could, that would mean that the game would just end and we already beat the destruction. So this whole thing is strange and suspicious. However, if an Aeon War were to start, we have two examples to look at to understand how these events work and the result of the fallout: the Swarm Disaster and the Machine Emperor's Wars. And yes, I am counting Rupert's 2 wars, but I explained both of them in these 2 past videos, and I'm sure you guys don't need to hear about the robo-racist story again. So let's take a look into the insane damage caused by the Propagation's Aeon War, shall we? Because it is incredibly fitting that it was because of the Machine Emperor's Wars and the Swarm Disaster that Nanook even came to be. And I've never actually went into full detail on what happened during the Swarm Disaster. So let's get into this. Caused by none other than the Imperator Insectorum and Swarm author Tazzyronth the Propagation. Now, contrary to what memes and Enigmata followers would lead you to believe, the propagation was not spawned by the desire to reproduce, but instead intense loneliness. And this is very Hoyo, because Hoyo has the tendency for characters that are incredibly lonely to make a second self, like Honkai Impact 3rd Seela. You see, Seela created a second self that we call Veliona out of a stigmata that she naturally manifested, and the two shared a body. Fun fact, when Seela's stigmata was activated and Veliona was in control of the body, her eyes would turn red, and that's something that the Star Rail Seela's eyes do, but that of course is never explained because Seela's lore disappeared into the Sea of Butterflies, illusions of things that don't exist. But unlike Seela, Tazzyronth didn't stop at just one self. They kept going, and going, and going, transforming themselves into a self-replicating horror that wreaked havoc on the entire cosmos. Because the way that this self-replication worked is that Tazzyronth could replicate, and so could their replications. So in an instant, one became millions, and millions became billions, and so on, creating an army that destroyed countless worlds. Yes, Tazzyronth was an Aeon that caused problems for the entire universe from the moment they ascended. And there wasn't much mortals could even do about it. Because even other Aeons saw the path of propagation as a huge threat, leading to Ouroboros the Veracity challenging the Swarm. And let me tell you, the fallout of these two clashing forces is unlike anything we have ever seen. Because just these two Aeons fighting affected 2/3 of all life in the universe. Yes, 66.67% of the entire universe of Honkai Star Rail was affected by this one battle. But this wasn't just Tazzyronth causing problems, because Ouroboros opened their giant maw in an attempt to consume the swarm, and with this attempt led to countless worlds and probably galaxies being swallowed and deleted from existence. But this was not even a victory for Ouroboros. Quite the contrary, actually. Because just because the swarm was largely eaten, this does not mean that they died instantly, because after this battle, Ouroboros would fall and disappear. Which leads me to think, at least, that in a turn of twisted irony, the swarm ate the Aeon of Veracity alive from the inside. So in a weird and strangely fitting way, Ouroboros ate themselves to death. And this must have been a shock to the Aeons, who undoubtedly witnessed this apocalyptic event, because Anna the Order, as one standing for righteousness as they are, reached out to Qlipoth, hoping to find a way to defeat the propagation that continued to replicate. And Qlipoth brought the rain, because in a true Avengers Assemble moment, Qlipoth allied with Anna, who, Aha, Akavili, and Sheepe combined forces to walk down Tazzyronth, or rather, the many, many Tazzyronths. So, needless to say, Tazzy was beaten into submission. In fact, they were so thoroughly defeated that they attempted to bargain for their life by giving up their ability to replicate. But this wasn't good enough for the Aeonic Avengers, and Qlipoth ended up imprisoning the last of Tazzyronth in amber, kinda like one of those fossilized mosquitoes. And thus was the end of the swarm disaster. For now, because we are well aware that the forces of the swarm are still out there, and the possibility of Tazzyronth resurfacing is a sneaking little thing that we're all kind of worried about. And this is also what makes Ronmay's experiments so unfathomably dangerous, because one slip up and Scaricabaz as a propagation emanator can cause another swarm disaster by itself. Fun fact, the remnants of the swarm is so strong that it is even a threat to the destruction to this day. Because remember how I mentioned before that the Lord Ravager Zula was killed by Galaxy Rangers? Well, I didn't explain how. Truth is, the Galaxy Rangers found a way to lead the swarm to him. So not even an emanator of destruction is strong enough to combat the swarm. But this was probably a massive swarm. Nothing like what we saw the Glamoth Iron Cavalry fighting. That was a small swarm and only a single swarm mother. Remember, destruction emanators are planet level at the weakest. So you can only imagine the size of the swarm the Galaxy Rangers had to lead to Zulo in order to take him down. And this is just one aspect of the swarm disaster's aftermath. Might I add, Nanook exists because of the swarm disaster and Rupert. Aeonic Wars are nothing to play around with. They result in the fall of paths and the ascensions of aeons. The universe itself suffers irreparable losses because of these events. And this is what Iron Tomb is attempting to start with his Black Tide destruction equation, a threat that is well capable of destroying Nous. And if Nous falls, I don't even know how to begin to explain what would happen, because the only thing that keeps the geniuses in the Genius Society in check are other geniuses. And since they all follow Nous, they are at least easy to keep track of, for the most part. There's still Dr. Primitive and Polka Kakamon running around. And Nous is constantly attempting to predict the future, so their actions can be at least seen in advance. But without this, utter chaos would inevitably envelop the universe. Not even other paths would be safe from this catastrophe, because Nous is a very benign Aeon. They just kinda sit around and calculate things for the sake of knowledge and figuring out what the mysteries of the universe are. That's the whole reason why Nous was created in the first place by Xandar 1 Quabra, which means that they have many allies and ties to other paths. An easy example would be the Hunt. The Xianzhou's Divination Commission depends entirely on Nous. Fushan's Omnitia is a gift from Nous. The Matrix of Prescience was inspired by Nous. And this is how the Xianzhou flagships calculate their routes. So they would be screwed if Nous ceased to be. And the preservation? Well, They run the Intelligentsia Guild, which is where they make weapons, do all of their research, and pursue all types of academics. So without Nous, they would be directionless. So needless to say, Nous is rooted into the framework of civilization regardless of what path you follow or what faction you are part of. Everyone needs Nous whether they like it or not. So the fall of this Aeon would undoubtedly lead to the collapse of a lot. So just in case you weren't informed, this is what is at stake in our attempt to take down Iron Tomb. This is something that cannot be taken lightly, and I truly mean it when I say that the stakes have never been higher. Everything is riding on this last cycle. And with that said, I think we are ready for 3.5. Because this is the Aeon War of Star Rail explained. So I think this drums up hype for the 3.5 live stream, right? As an Erudition Elation follower, I take great joy in showing you guys what makes this story so special. Because not enough people truly understand what's going on here, and I have made it my mission to make sure you guys comprehend exactly what is happening. Yes, the creator and originator of the series How to Confuse a Honkai Star Rail player is now trying to make it all as understandable as possible. Life is strange. And speaking of the origins of this channel, we are getting closer and closer to that 50,000 milestone, and let's just say we're gonna come together and start some chaos with this one. But that aside, we gotta save Emporius, take down Iron Tomb, prevent another Aeon War from happening with the power of the Trailblaze, and of course, friendship, because this is a Ho-Yo game. But what do you guys think? Be sure to let me know, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace, y'all.